Hello everyone and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Colonel James Allen Regenor. James is the co-founder of VeriTX, a digital supply chain solutions provider. He is a serial entrepreneur, technologist, futurist, author, and commentator who has profoundly impacted digital transformation across the aerospace, medical, and industrial sectors. James is an accomplished inventor with 6 awarded patents and 11 pending ones. Among his groundbreaking inventions are the Galactic Extrusion manufacturing solution, also known as GEMS, a technology for on-orbit or celestial body manufacturing. Before his venture in digital transformation, James served 31 years in the United States Air Force, retiring as colonel. James, welcome to the Future Space.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Daniel.
You're going to have to explain to me a little bit what GEMS is for, but before we get there, could you share with us 3 words that for you captures the essence of space?
Timeless, digital, and connected.
Digital, space, digital. Expand a little bit more.
I think space is our truly first all-digital environment. So in other words, things that we want to communicate with, things that perhaps we want to manufacture, whatever's going to go up to space, I think will go there digitally. And it creates an environment where data is very important. There's a high consequence of failure, as you know, in space. You usually only get one chance to do it right. So being able to have data and data integrity and trusting your data is going to be very, very important in space. As if we get into a conflicted environment, our enemy is likely to attack our data supply chain, just like he would our regular supply chain. So that's why it's digital.
Interesting. When it comes to space, because of the distance, the transfer of data takes a long time. And people are saying, well, 20 minutes to Mars, this is just the reality of it. But I look back into where we are today and where we were, 75 years ago, even just with the movement of information, internet, right? What we thought was kind of limited to this box, now we're uploading, downloading so much information. Do you think that space, we're going to see the same kind of technology in space, what we think is impossible today? In 50 years, now we're going to figure out a way to transmit that data much, much faster than we think is possible?
I certainly think that that's the case. We talk about edge computing nowadays. What is the edge? Is the edge some island? Is the edge some ship? Or is the edge some planetary object or something moving through the galaxy? So if you're going to be at the edge, how then do you communicate, as you mentioned, with speed? And really, what is speed? So if you think in terms of, back during the Civil War era, if your wife got a letter from you every 6 months saying, hey, I'm okay, she was happy. I go back to Desert Storm, and I was on Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean using British Wireless and would make an appointment for my Saturday 15 minutes to go in and talk on the phone once a week. So, my wife was happy that she heard from me once a week. Now, when the 3 dots are done on a text message, if she doesn't see my 3 dots, she thinks I've perished, So understanding what that means, 20 minutes from Mars, people could be going, oh my goodness, what's going on? 20 minutes. 20 minutes? Well, it's unbelievable when you think about it, So we will find ways to, put signal boosters, relays, to be able to move data quicker. We'll find ways to do it, with lasers and some other things that are being talked about now to move data. So I think, yes, to answer your question, it's only going to get faster. Right now, we're at the baseline. 20 minutes, okay. Now let's go from there.
There are a lot of people who are looking to the moon to have basically the servers over there, or satellites, right? Having so that, first of all, the heat is not an issue, electricity, you have the sun coming. Is that something that you also see in the future of storing and moving data?
Most certainly, yeah. I think that you're going to be in an environment that, as you mentioned before, heat is a big deal, right? With server farms, we're putting them in cold environments like Iceland, or we're putting them underwater to the water act as a heat sink, and so on. Space is the ultimate heat sink. It sucks heat out of everything very quickly. So, we're not going to have the same concerns in space that we would have here, but we will have other concerns, So, for example, shielding from radiation and some other things that our atmosphere is kind enough to do for us here, that we're going to have to protect things in space. So, again, there'll be another set of challenges that we have to come to understand and to mitigate, and there'll also be some benefits.
Before we get into really the technicality of what you're working on and going more into data and space, we know that there's a science story to space, there's a technology story, there's the astronomy of space. But going beyond that, what do you think is the human story of space?
So at the risk of sounding like a loon, I do believe the human story is, there are origins of our human condition that I think have come from space many, many, many years ago. So I think it's a journey much like the salmon, returning to where they spawn. It's a journey for us to reconnect with what I'll call intelligent life that was there perhaps before, that perhaps touched our planet before. I'm a believer in, we're fools to think that in the vastness of the galaxy that we're the only species that is alive in the billions and billions of potential planets. I'm also a firm believer that we don't understand time in celestial terms. We aren't even, when you hit a watch, the stopwatch, we're not even the first tick. We're somewhere between when you pressed and when the spring actually felt the press. That's where we are in our lifetime, or in the lifetime of the human species, I think, in terms of celestial time. So not understanding time, I think, hurts us a little bit because we don't think in a far enough horizon for what we're trying to do. People often refer back to Chinese and talk about Chinese, think about strategy. I'm a military person, as mentioned. They think of strategy in 100-year type of time periods, and we think of strategy in a couple. Unfortunately, in our world in the U.S., it's every 4 years because it's an election cycle that drives a lot of economics and so on. So understanding time will be helpful for us. I think we'll get a better appreciation for time, for distance and speed, as we mentioned before, with time to get communications going. But I think we'll ultimately connect with other potential life as we press out beyond our solar system and perhaps out beyond our galaxy.
I always believe that the nature here on Earth, there's no reason why it would be different than the nature of the universe or in the universe. If life entire goal is to connect on Earth, right? Life everywhere is always looking to expand and to connect. Then it would want to connect also beyond or in the universe. So if there's other pockets of life out there, its goal, not that like life as an entity and is driven by goal, but it wants to connect. So as soon as we take care of the logistic and the challenges of traveling beyond Earth, then I think we'll find a lot of life in the universe. But the big question is there intelligent life in that same, that higher or lower than us? Because the dinosaurs existed on the planet for hundreds of millions of years, and it took basically a clean slate to have that kind of intelligent life. You see a lot of life out there in the universe, but do you see intelligent life to be rarer, or what are your thoughts?
If you're a believer that UFOs exist and have been visiting us, and there's been a lot in the last 6 or 7 months that have been coming out about folks talking about UFOs and so on, then we have to think that perhaps there's more than one set of or people that are intelligent enough to travel to the Earth. Maybe it's a logistics issue. Maybe they visit only as their planet is in a position in the planet's orbit to be able to make the journey, or maybe it's a timing issue. Some folks say there could be, again, I don't want to make this about aliens. I'm just trying to talk about the broader idea, but there could be dimensions, another dimension that perhaps we're unaware of, and there are folks among us, or in the oceans. People have talked about that. We only see a very small portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. Maybe there's other portions that things exist in that we just don't see. Are they foreign, alien? Well, certainly they would be foreign to us. It could be species on this planet we're not even seeing. Alien? Well, do they come from somewhere else, or were put here by someone else? I don't think an intelligent person would just say, no, there's nothing that exists beyond me. I mean, that seems to be like the worst thing we could possibly say. I see this almost like, this will sound really odd, but you remember in the Terminator when the guy's been out of the metal, the liquid metal, and all the pieces, and they all kind of crawl on the floor and form back together, and he just never dies. I see the kind of the universe in that kind of sense, where we're all kind of trying to pull back together into whatever that thing, that grand designer had in mind. Not to be religious, is there a God, is there not a God? But certainly this isn't by happenstance as we look around. There is a grand design. These things are so complex, just so complex to think that it just happened because some rocks hit together and created this galaxy in this cataclysmic way.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens, I think, in the next 100 years, time-wise, and also what we think is possible for the human experience. Because from a couple of things that I've written to the past, how, if you look at life on Earth, when it went from single cell to multi-cells, evolution kind of exploded. And now we're about to go from single planet to multi-planet. And that step, what is necessary for that step, will open the field of experiences and destinations.
Yeah, the Chinese say, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, right? So we have to step off. And it's in our nature to step off. And it's in our nature to explore. But maybe our nature will change a little bit too as we explore the space and get out of the competitiveness of our nature and the waste that we waste so much time, energy, and money competing with people, governments, and it's insane. If we put that effort into actually making the human condition better, we'd be so much better off.
James, right now you have a lot of projects working into manufacturing. Well, you have VeriTX, and then you have your other companies, and a lot of it touches to crypto. A lot of it is manufacturing in space. Can you decipher, like paint a picture of what you're working on right now?
So what we're trying to do is we've spent a lot of time developing a lot of intellectual property. And that intellectual property has really been around kind of this vision of the future. And this vision of the future is manufacturing things where you need it, when you need it, right? Why? Because it's not wasteful. Two, it's timely, so you can push things to where you need. You don't have long wait times and lead times. And three, it really allows you to take away boundaries and be able to move things, whether it's across the planet, whether it's across a river, whether it's up to space. But you can now push things to the point of use and then consume them when you need them, which really changes the paradigm. But it really creates a microeconomic advantage both to the producer and to the consumer. The producer doesn't have to maintain a bunch of inventory, which just sits on shelves and consumes resources and really eats away at the balance sheet. And on the other side, the consumer, he can get things when he needs them, where he needs them. He doesn't have to worry about transportation. He doesn't have to worry about all the non-value-added costs associated with receiving some sort of product, right? Because anywhere from half to 30% to half of the cost of an item is in that tail that creates, how do I then get it to market? How then do I sell it? How then do I buy it? How then do I transport it? How then do I warehouse it? And so on. So being able to create these microeconomic advantages that actually aid both sides of the balance sheet is very, very helpful. So what we did was we set out and started looking at where do those situations exist. Having come from the military, having been at the end of the supply chain in places like Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, or you pick the place, waiting for parts, I went to work for a company that acquired a 3D print business. And I said, this 3D printing is really cool, but it's no different than actually a CNC machine because you still move things digitally. That's really cool. And now all of a sudden you could put that 3D printer at a forward operating base. You could put it on a ship, an oil rig, a mining community, wherever it might be. And when it needs a part, it can then get the part. What then drives that? Well, it's all about uptime, right? So whether it's an airplane, a spaceship, an oil rig, uptime matters. Any type of downtime is what's killing people, profit and that sort of thing. So putting all these things together to create this digital environment, or what I'll call the fourth modality of logistics, which is digital logistics, being able to push parts to to where they need to be, being able to push data to where it needs to be effective, drove us into this environment. And space, as I mentioned before, is a good example. So I'll talk about the example in space. So the example in space is, we've all seen Apollo 13, where they had to manufacture the oxygen scrubber inside with Tom Hanks. And all of a sudden, here we have engineers in Houston with all the things that are possible that they could have on the ship, and they have to come up with an oxygen scrubber, a carbon dioxide scrubber, so that they could get the oxygen to survive, right? But what if there was a 3D printer? And there is a 3D printer up on the ISS, International Space Station. But what if there's a 3D printer and they could just send a file up there and they could then make the part? So what we did was we enabled, and this is 2016, we came up with a patent that would enable you to leverage some technologies that are fairly modern, like blockchain and this advanced manufacturing, 3D printing, and be able to move a part and be able to show that it had data integrity, so you knew that you're receiving exactly what you intended to receive, process integrity, which you could prove that you did exact process that was required, and then the final one, inside of the build chamber, you get performance integrity. So you knew that the 3D printer or whatever machine it was going to be was making the product exactly how it needed to be made. So if you had those three integrities, you could then take that part and use it. And so what we did was we built the bottom piece before around moving that file up, and we'll use a space station, up to a space station. Within that, we had to then focus on that data integrity piece. So we built FoS, which is good for sending financial information, as good as it is for sending a part, and understanding that, one, nobody's tampered with the part. Two, that the part's secure. We partner with IBM and use some quantum tools so that people can't use quantum to then break the encryption. And then three, that we're able to provide provenance. So you're able to see every touch that happens to that part, which goes back to that performance side of it. So now you send that up to, we'll use GEMS, as you mentioned, so our Galactic Extrusion manufacturing system. We're able to now manufacture or sustain repair. So think about you're on the space station and you get a hole in it, hits a piece of space junk, now you have to repair it. Now, what if you had a robot that had an extrusion function to it? So what is extrusion? I'll make it simple. When you roll up your toothpaste tube and something comes out the end, you're extruding. Or if you use a caulking gun to seal your tile, it's extrusion. If you're using Play-Doh in a machine and you press down on it and stars come out or triangles, that's extrusion. Or if you're just taking the raw tape and extending this, you're extruding the tape. So, but being able to use extrusion to go out and do repairs or sustainment, or using it to create an antenna array, or using it to create, on a planetary object to be able to create a house using the soil that's there and being able to make a material that you can use. There's companies like Iconic that are building a community in Austin. You've probably heard of them, which is extrusion. So, but being able to use these extrusions, our patent specifically is using different shapes on the extrusion head for those things to come together and form the bond. We have another patent that then after we build, we're able to examine it, because you're not going to want to build something in space and not have a look at it. Here on Earth, they do non-destructive inspections. A lot of times it's done with CT scanning or X-ray machines. But we're lucky, up in space, every day and here on Earth, we're being bombarded with muons. And, when they want to look at the pyramids and find a new chamber, they use muons. When they want to look in a volcano, they use muons. Muons will go through 6 feet of rock. So now you have these muons. If you're able to create a characterization of what you want to build, so physics-based model, and now all of a sudden you can go up and you can build something with GEMS, and then you can take a sensor and see what the muon flow looks like. If there's a crack or void, you'll see more muons coming through because there's less resistance and so on. So now all of a sudden you can say, okay, I've built something, I can look at it. I know I'm using hand signals and this is only an audio cast, so it's kind of funny that, Daniel, you're laughing at me. But you can look into the structure that you just built or you just repaired, and you can say, yep, this is good. Why? Because as I mentioned before, that high consequence failure matters in space much more than it matters here on Earth in some cases. Although if you're on an airplane, it matters there. Now all of a sudden you're able to build it. Well, then we have another patent on top of that is now we have a patent using NFTs, non-fungible tokens. So some people think of Bored Ape Yacht Club and those things for NFTs, but there are other very practical applications. And using an NFT and creating a digital twin from a physical object, we call that a phygital bridge. You're able to now record all that information about that object you just built and then through the product lifecycle, monitor it. So you get all that data stored into these NFTs, so then you can start aggregating data and information and so on. So now all of a sudden I've gone all the way from that initial design at that guy's desk at NASA that wants to make that air scrubber machine, or the air scrubber machine that they need. We've been able to now send a part up there. We're able to manufacture that part. Then we can monitor that part's performance using an NFT to take the telemetry and information off that part and then follow it through its full product lifecycle and maybe create a better scrubber next time or aggregate the data for whatever. So we've created this end-to-end manufacturing system that is very suited for Earth, but also very suited for space. And I think not only suited, but really it's an imperative for space. We're going to want to be able to see that. Because the minute that, in heaven forbid we have one, but it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, we have an accident, we're going to have to be able to go back through and really get to root cause analysis. So one of the things I had to do in the Air Force was I went through Aircraft Accident Board President course. I was early in my career, I was on an Aircraft Accident Board. But what that does is you look at everything that goes on, whether it's the physiological effects of the pilot, what he ate, what he drank, who he slept with, did he argue with his girlfriend, all the way through the mechanical elements of the airplane to try to figure out what caused the crash. And most of those records are done in paper. It's very difficult to aggregate and so on. So now we're able to push all this stuff together. And like I said, in the event that we have success or failure, we're going to want to understand why. And this will give us the why in a digital sense. But it will also give us the full stream, as I mentioned, in this digital environment so that we can ensure that we have data integrity, process integrity, and performance integrity. That's a lot to unpack, so I'm going to be quiet.
It's I want to make sure that what is received is exactly what you sent over, so I'm going to process all this.
Unintended. That was nice.
This is amazing. I mean, it's a technology that can be obviously applied here on Earth, moving information, financial information, and I'm pretty sure you guys are on it. But one question that I do have in the back of my mind, and it kind of connects to some of the things we were talking earlier about how, I grew up where the beginning of internet, AOL, 120, 26 kilobyte per second, we're all super excited when it went to 256. And now here we are talking about almost a similar infrastructure from those times, but with a technology that moves speeds to a scale that was impossible to think back in those days. With your current technology and the way that you move information right now, do you see a future where you will be in a position to move an exponential amount of information within that same structure, that same technology? Yeah,
absolutely. So I mean, we're moving so these build files, like for a part, are 6 to 9 gig, and the associated information. So that doesn't seem very high, but now all of a sudden when you're doing 4, 5, 10, 20, 100 of them, you're in the terabyte range. Being able to move data in the terabyte range is really, really important. Being able to encrypt data, being able to, as I mentioned before, we provide tamper evidence, so being able to show that nobody's tampered with your data, which is really critical, will be very important in these setups. I think, though, what's changed, so I grew up in the same time, fighting for the phone to do the dial-up and everything. So back then, the network was the phone, right? You had to have that phone. Today, the network is you and me. We're the network. We're the internet, right? Everybody's a sensor. I'm sure you have Wild Wild Space. I'm late to the game, but you watch Wild Wild Space. The first 2 satellites that Planet put up were basically cell phones. The capability of a cell phone is what they put up. But all of a sudden, it changed everything, right? So we're the network. It's foolish to think that the network is anything other than that. You can put up 5G, 6G, 10, 12G. It doesn't really matter. We are now the sensor of the network and everything else. Now we're pulling information, but we're synthesizing that data. And I think that it only gets more rich for us as we go on. So, whether it's through AI or through quantum, but we are the network, and we can't lose sight of that. So the reason why we want to push outward into space is because we want to extend the network of us.
As someone who's been obviously quite involved in diplomacy and different cultures around the world, right, with the United States Air Force, and understanding conflict, I would say that there are kind of two mindsets of space. There are a generation that grew up watching Star Trek and think that space is just going to be an episode of Star Trek, and then there are others who understand that it's a race, right? It's a race with China. Russia is no more of a big player, but China is definitely one and has shown that they want to have their own agenda. What do you think is going to be that future of that next kind of expansion? Is it going to be one of diplomacy, or we really have to kind of prepare on both ends? We want to do a lot of work towards diplomacy, but at the same time we have to prepare for conflict negotiation. What are your thoughts?
So I'm a competitor. I like to compete, but often I think that what we're competing for, the goal, is where we're askew. So, for example, let's just say the space race. And let's say it's us and the Chinese now for this next space race. And what are we competing for? Are we competing to be the first person to Mars? Because if we are, it's now China, SpaceX, and the U.S. So we're getting out of this area, and really it's happening here on the Earth as much as it is in space. But we find corporations are doing things that are expected of governments. You mentioned cryptocurrency, for example. Cryptocurrency is, you can create a currency, and people have created currency, whether it's Bitcoin or some of the others. Governments, that's a role of the governments to create currency, right? And then governments influence currency with monetary and fiscal policy, whereas corporation creates money. You're not burdened or more to this fiscal and monetary policy. Or governments go to space, right? But then SpaceX went to space, and others have gone to space, Rocket Lab, and so on. So now all of a sudden, what used to be expected of the government is now available to commercial. Same goes for defense. We use third-party defense now. It's not governments. And I talk to people often about this. The world that we live in today grew up around rivers, right? So whether they're the rivers on the Hudson here in North America, the Mississippi, or the Amazon, or in Egypt on the Nile, or the Seine or the Danube in Europe, civilizations, governments, countries, commerce all happen around rivers. Today we are operating in digital rivers, which don't have shorelines and bounds to them. It's where the data flows. And space is that same thing. It's a digital river, or ocean in that case. But things are moving. So this competition should be about how then do we better mankind, not how then do I create profit for SpaceX, but profit drives exploration and innovations it has for centuries and conquest. Or how do I create, stake the U.S. flag on Mars and say, this is U.S. territory now, and so on. Most of space is regulated, at least for the participants right now, with treaties. What if a SpaceX satellite crashes into a satellite that's put up by Blue Origin? Is there a forum to mitigate or to adjudicate what that might look like? I don't believe so right now. So I just spoke to a company called Jurat.io, which is a blockchain company that's doing like arbitration, adjudication, and some other stuff for federal courts. But there's not a body up in space. So we'll kind of park that idea. But governments, people must come together, and we shouldn't compete to be the first person. We should compete to advance mankind, to get mankind there. So, we've got a prime example today. The ISS, we got 2 astronauts that are stranded up there, right? I don't know if you've read this in the internet here in the last couple of days, but there's a group of retired folks over in Russia who are pushing Vladimir Putin to go up and rescue those 2 folks. They're going to be there, and rescue is kind of probably not the optimum term because they're not in distress. They're just inconvenienced. They're going to be there until February. But all of a sudden, what does that mean? We have the International Space Station, so there are Russians and U.S. and others on there. We're in space. We've come together for a common goal, and that's to make that mission be successful. Well, that should then become what is the primary mission as we move to space. So this competition of I have to get there first and be the best isn't really working. I'm not going to say anything about commercial because I think commercial is extremely important. It's driving down costs and everything else. When governments did things, space shuttle days, $26,000 for a kilo into space. Today it's about $150. Elon Musk is going to drive it down to 30. It's going to be cheaper to send something kilo into space than it's going to be to send, from my house to your house, Daniel. So overnight. So that's kind of disjointed in a long answer, but there's a lot to go into these answers because they're not yes or no or one sentence answers. it's, what drives human behavior today on Earth? What drives innovation exploration? If you go back to the early days, it was about getting land for the king, getting some gold or some sort of resource, spices, gold, whatever it might be, cocoa beans, I don't know. But that's what drove commercial folks to go there so they could make money. That's what, again, motivated governments to pay commercial folks to go there. I'm not saying we should take that away, but what I'm saying at the end is it shouldn't be about subjugation of people. It shouldn't be about stealing resources. It shouldn't be about any of that beyond let's advance man. Now, resources might pay for it. If we run into other people, we may be the ones subjugated. So, you got to watch what you're doing. But that's kind of my craziness there. Sorry.
No, not craziness at all. And I think that part of the reasons why we're at that state now that we can look into these solutions is because we're not dependent on nature for as much as we used to, right, back in the days. You mentioned the expansion, the ocean exploration. I mean, Europe had basically had no more resources, so it was the billionaires at that time, the kings and queens, were financing these expeditions so you could find new resources. And now, we have different billionaires who are looking into financing the expansion, but the underlying, I would say, privilege is because now we can enjoy nature rather than just fully relying on it. We don't have to go and harvest, not everyone, right? We have a different set of circumstances that allow us to go and take a walk in the forest as opposed to look at a forest and see what can I get from it.
I used to tell people all the time, kind of in my business when I would speak to people, because again, this whole thing I started with the idea of how do I send a part out to an aircraft carrier and manufacture there, put it on a plane that's got to fly a critical mission, right? And I used to think a lot about bias and sitting down on Earth, looking up at Mars, saying I'd like to go to Mars one day, but that's going to be really hard. There's this bias of this impossible or very difficult. But if you change your position and you frame it that you're looking at Mars, you're on Mars looking backwards, and you have to answer the question, how did I get here? You take away the bias of it being possible or not possible. And what you do then is fill in the technology gaps that are required for you to solve the problems, challenges to get there. And it changes everything prospectively, So, that's what we have to do. We have to accept the fact that we're going to go to Mars, we're going to go to these other planets, and now we just have to answer the challenges. How are we going to get there? What technology gaps do we have, and so on. I think that's really, really important. And it's really important that when we change that perspective, that we look at each other differently. The whole story about Planet, Planet photographs every inch of the Earth every 24 hours. And think of all the knowledge we've gained on Earth, whether it's around natural disasters, whether it's around plants or deforestation or whatever the use case is. I mean, the folks on Planet were telling people that Russia's going to invade Ukraine long before anybody else was saying it because they were seeing it. But even if we don't get beyond our geosynchronous orbit, even if we just focus on commercial space, we can make our lives so much better here on Earth for everybody by utilizing the tools that the high ground, use a military expression, the high ground now gives you this view that you didn't have before, right? So it's really important.
It's one thing that we're constantly, the work that we're doing in Future Space is how can we move forward, pointing the finger forward with acquired wisdom rather than looking backward and thinking that we're missing things as opposed to focusing on what we're gaining. I think that we have a romantic idea of what the past was, and people have forgotten the realities of the past. And we all should be embracing moving forward. And I think that if everybody's realizing that even if we disagree, we're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to do, to be valued in our job. We're trying to put food on the table. We're trying to give our children a future. Then after that, there's some differences in how to achieve that. But everybody is trying to move in the same direction, forward. Like even when it comes to space and the vision of what we want Earth to be, space will have to be part of the solution. There's no way, just even in resource extraction, to get the kind of the battery economy that we want to have. Right now, all the resources is quite of a challenge for extraction, but if you start to look into space and you can get mining, on an asteroid where the land is barren, you don't have a rich, ecosystem. Obviously, you want to extract from there rather than from an environment where the ecosystem is really complicated.
So, for example, space has improved life today. So, I've got a friend who works at a lift company. They're making rockets. It's called VIA, VAYA, and they're making rocket fuel out of recycled plastic. People said that couldn't be done. So think about that. So we have plenty of recycled plastic. It's not a resource we're going to run out of anytime soon. So now all of a sudden you're being able to turn that into something that, again, can lift objects into space. We've learned so much about space. We're going to pulse engines. There's plasma pulse engines. Is that beyond fusion and so on? But there's a lot that's going to be gained through the idea that we want to, again, move beyond our planet, our orbit, and we'll just stepping stone. We go to moon first, then Mars, then from there, where are we headed? Think about the idea that we will, in our lifetime, maybe not, but you're a little bit younger than me, maybe in my son's lifetime, there will be humans that are born off of the Earth that have never been to the Earth or won't travel to the Earth. They'll go somewhere else. That's a lot to take in all of a sudden. Their recollections of Earth will be pictures and maybe video, teleconferencing, and that sort of thing, but they won't experience the Earth. Now, there are plenty of people on Earth that aren't going to experience Moon, aren't going to experience Mars, and so on. But what does that mean for our species when we now have people in the evolution of our bodies and so on in these microgravity environments? What does that mean? Those are questions that aren't in the distant future. They're on the horizon. We can see them. So we should start asking questions like that. The people that stand up and say, I want to be one of the first people that goes on Mars. There's a young girl that stood up, and I forget her name, you probably know. But think about that. That's like the first person that said to Christopher Columbus, hey, I want to ride on the boat with you, or further back, the Vikings, It took something special to be that person and to step across that line and say, I'm going, right? And I always tell people, I've been in leadership positions before, you're not a leader till you get the first follower. And usually the first follower is as bat crazy as you are, because, who's going to, it's like a startup, I wasn't a startup founder until I had somebody, it's my partner, Rich, but who's bat crazy enough to follow me and the idea and, build something with me. So, but those people are out there. I wish there were more of them, but it's very interesting.
And I think that's the big lesson from doing solo wilderness expeditions and from you being a pilot in the United States Air Force, is that you realize that the conception of impossible is just a perspective, right? It's not can or can't, it's more, well, it works or it doesn't work. And you realize how resilient and resourceful our species is and how life basically figures out a way to adapt. When I have conversations with people that say, well, no, it's impossible, it's not going to happen, these are the realities of space, I'm like, well, look into the past. There were so many times where we thought it was impossible, and now we take it for granted. So the only assumption, the only thing that I can rely on is looking back into a history, right? Thousands of years of history where we thought things were impossible, and now it is daily occurrence. So looking forward, we know it doesn't work right now, but if we continue that line, we will find the solutions until a point where it becomes kind of it's a no-brainer because now we have the hindsight.
Well, the word, and again, this will sound grade school corny, but the word impossible really is I am possible. I'm possible. So think about that. As corny as it sounds, you have to take that bias out. It's like the first time you rode a two-wheeler. I didn't have. My father didn't take my training wheels off and push and all that sort of stuff. He did that for my brother, who's 11 months older than me, and my brother learned to ride a two-wheeler. Well, that day he learned to ride a two-wheeler, I said, well, I'm going to ride a two-wheeler. So I went out and got on his bike without the guidance of my father or anybody else, and I rode a two-wheeler. Now, I crashed into a sandbox and had to get stitches and everything else, but you know what? I didn't have training wheels after that day ever again. So I am possible. So what you set your mind to, and if you surround yourself with people who, again, don't have that bias of impossibility, you're going to achieve that. And think about, one of the things we didn't talk about is there's this other revolution going on beyond space. It's the quantum revolution right now, right? We're over 1,000 qubits at IBM on Project Hummingbird, and Honeywell's coming up, and others. So for the first time in our lifetime, we no longer have to create models to simulate nature. Quantum is nature, so you don't have to simulate. So that's going to open up all kinds of opportunities for us as we go forward, that computing power. So go all the way back to, when we're trying to do the initial space program to get to the moon, that UNIVAC computer took up a building, and it was a bunch of, switches, in a algorithmic binary type of environment. Now, all of a sudden, we're going to be able to do 1,000,000 times more than we can do with a traditional computer, all right, at speeds that are 1,000,000 times faster. So what opportunities does that open? What parts of nature, now that we are able to experience nature in quantum, will that then avail to us that we couldn't see before because we didn't have the world to simulate? All that then is on this collision course with space and our desire to explore, and the tools are being made available to us to extend. That's all I'm saying. It's there. And where you have to look is where these collisions of technologies happen. So, being able to do new propulsion, being able to, a lot of the stuff that they're able to do with Falcon and lift, this heavy vehicles in the space that still have power, fuel to go beyond orbit, right? So all these things are coming together at a very curious time for us that, the world has this instability. And, it would be much better if it was stable and we were all hands on deck pushing the effort forward to, again, make ourselves better, make our species better. But we're not. So, and that's part of the human condition, right? We still have greed. We still have the desire to subjugate and conquer. So,
yeah, nature, part of nature. James, I have a feeling that you might have said your 3 words of wisdom.
Well, I have 3 for you if you want them. Audacious. Be audacious in the things you do. Be bold. Authentic. Too long we travel and try to put on different masks to be different people. Just be who you are. Be authentic. And the last is be accountable. Be accountable to yourself, your community, the earth, and so on. If you do those 3 things, we're all going to be better off.
And then in parentheses, I am possible.
I am possible. You're possible. So we are possible. I mean, that's the mindset. We live in an age, but people would say, well, that's a first world problem. I'm not searching for water every day. I'm not searching for food every day. I'm not trying to figure out how I'm going to nourish my children and so on. We don't need first world problems. And again, we have the means now to solve a lot of these problems. But the challenges that we have is, again, greed, subjugation, that sort of stuff.
Well, James, you've always fascinated me with the projects that you're working on and the diverse spectrum on where you navigate. And so I always enjoy our conversations, and I'm looking forward for our next time because it's been too long. So we have to make sure that we circle back. And so, James, always a pleasure.
We need to create the circle, though. And we and I have had this conversation before of like-minded people moving in the same direction. There needs to be some sort of confederation of ideas and peoples in effort to advance. It's not really about advancing. We're going to advance. It's to accelerate.
This is what future space, this is what we're working at. We're really about embracing these new frontiers moving forward, celebrating the human experience, but elevating the conversations. Like, we want to shape the narrative of tomorrow so that we can be more productive as opposed to kind of point the fingers at each other or thinking that we have to do less. Right? How can we do more, but better? Right? The solution which should not be about how can we remove things from the equations, but how can we add and do it better and more sustainable and find the solution so that we can do that, as opposed to thinking that we're regressing and looking at the cave, thinking like now we have to go and hide ourselves into the closet because we're bad. That's not a solution, and it's not inspiring for anyone, right? So,
since I met you, Daniel, I mean, you have one, the solo traveler that you are and explorer that you are, but beyond that, what you just said, right, was, we have to elevate the conversation. So you've done much to elevate the conversation and make me think differently. So I much appreciate that, and I know your better half, Tristan's done the same, and I much appreciate that. You guys are you're leading the charge. And if you need a first follower, I'll sign up and be the first follower.
Thank you, James. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Take good care.